Picture this. You're a 12-year-old boy living in a small village in Bulgaria in the year 1550. The morning mist covers the valley, making everything look soft and quiet, like a blanket. You help your father with the sheep, and the sound of the bells around their necks is comforting, like music you've heard your whole life. It's peaceful and everything feels just right. Your mother is in the house preparing breakfast, warm bread and fresh goat's milk that taste just like home. They make you feel safe, like everything is exactly how it should be. Then everything changes. You suddenly hear the loud sound of hooves clattering on cobblestones, getting closer. The peaceful quiet is broken. You look up and you see your father's face turn pale. Your mother, holding a clay pitcher, drops it and it shatters on the floor, making a noise like your whole world falling apart. You know something is wrong. Your father looks scared. You don't understand why, but you can feel it. In your village, everyone knows the sound of those hooves. It means the Sultan's collectors have come. These are the people who take boys just like you to serve the Sultan. They've come to take you. The Ottoman officials get off their horses, wearing fancy silk robes that still look perfect despite the long journey. They carry scrolls and lists. Their eyes scan the villagers like they're inspecting cattle. You feel their cold stare and you realize they're looking for you. Suddenly one of the officials points right at you. Your heart skips a beat. Your mother falls to her knees, begging in a language they don't even understand. Your father just stands there silent, because he knows resisting will get them all killed. The official takes you by the arm and pulls you away. They tell you that serving the Sultan will be an honor and that you will become something important. They say it's a great opportunity, but all you hear are your mother's sobs, fading as you're dragged farther from everything you've ever known. You leave your village behind, and as the cart takes you away, you know deep down that this is just the beginning of something terrible. You will never see your mother again. This is the start of your life as a palace boy, one of the many children taken to serve in the most powerful empire into the world. And behind the palace walls, the horrors that await will make you wish you were back in your village, watching sheep in the misty valleys of home. The journey to Istanbul is the hardest thing you've ever experienced. You and the other boys are forced to march across rough, rocky land. You're not fed enough and you sleep outside or in shelters that barely protect you from the cold. The weakest boys, those who can't keep up or who get sick, are just left behind to die. You quickly learn that in the world you now live in, weakness means death. Only the strongest or the smartest will survive. There's a boy walking next to you. He's about 14, and he came from a Greek fishing village. His name is Nikos, but he whispers to you that soon he won't be allowed to use it. He tried to escape on the third night of the march, but the guards caught him before he even got a mile away. They dragged him back to the camp and beat him in front of everyone to teach them all a lesson. His screams echo through the night, and you try to block them out, but you can't. The lesson is clear. There's no escaping. There's no way out. Resistance is pointless. The world you once knew, the world where you had freedom, is gone. By the time you reach the outskirts of Istanbul, you've learned to move quietly like a shadow. You speak only when spoken to, and when the guards look your way, you try to make yourself invisible. You've seen other boys disappear in the night. Some tried to run, others couldn't handle the journey anymore. Their empty spaces in the line are reminders of what can happen to anyone who's weak. The first time you see the skyline of Istanbul should be breathtaking. The minarets reach high into the sky, and the Hagia Sophia's dome looms large. The palace complex stretches out before you, looking magnificent. But all you feel is a cold knot in your stomach. Istanbul is not a city of beauty. It's a prison, a place where everything you've ever known will be taken from you. This is where your journey really begins. You're chosen for a special school within the palace walls, the Enderan school, where you will be trained to serve the Sultan. But the training comes at a cost far greater than anything you imagined. The school is filled with danger, and the palace is a maze of marble halls and hidden rooms where no one can be trusted. They start by giving you a new name, one that erases who you once were. You are no longer the boy from the village. You are a tool of the empire now, and your old life is gone. You are forced to forget your family, your faith, and everything you once believed in. You become what they want you to be. Your first night in the dormitory is terrifying. You hear the sounds of other boys sobbing quietly in their beds, trying to hold back their tears. Some whisper in languages you don't understand, while others are too scared to speak at all. You lie awake, clutching the small wooden cross your mother gave you before they took you. But by morning, even that small piece of your past is gone. The cross is taken from you, and you are told to forget your Christian roots. The system is designed to break you down and turn you into something you never wanted to be. This is not an education. It's a process of dehumanization. You learned quickly how to move quietly, staying out of sight. Especially when the guards' attention turned dangerous. You'd seen other boys disappear in the night. Some tried to run away, others just couldn't keep going, and they were left behind. Their empty spots in the line were a constant reminder that anything could happen to you. When you finally saw the skyline of Istanbul, you should have been amazed by its beauty. The tall minarets, the giant Hagia Sophia, and the grand palace that seemed to stretch forever. It should have taken your breath away. But all you felt was a cold weight in your stomach. This city, so full of power and history, only reminded you of everything you lost, everything that was taken from you. Arriving in Istanbul, you were immediately part of the first selection. Ottoman officials lined up all the boys who had made it this far and started their judgment. They checked your teeth like you were a horse being sold at market. They tested your reflexes, made you say whatever little you knew of reading and numbers, measured your height, and even looked closely at your skin for marks. It felt like they were sizing you up as though you were an object, not a person. The most beautiful and the smartest boys were taken for the palace school, known as the Enderan school, while others were chosen for the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite army. But for those selected for palace service, a different kind of life awaited. One that would test not just your body's strength, but your spirit as well. It would break you down and try to rebuild you into something the Empire could use. You were one of the lucky ones, chosen for the Enderan school. The officials looked at your bright eyes, your healthy skin, and your clear mind. They smiled as if they were doing you a favour. You didn't understand then, but you soon would. Their smiles were not kind. They were the smiles of people who had found someone useful for their purposes. The Enderan school was called one of the first schools for gifted boys, but that description hides what really happened. You would learn many things: Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, along with subjects like math, astronomy, literature, and law. You'd even be trained in music, calligraphy, and other skills that were meant to serve the Sultan. But the price of this education was far more than books and lessons. The palace was a maze of beautiful marble halls and hidden passageways, but it was also full of danger. The place where you'd sleep felt more like a tomb than a home. The beds were narrow and covered in silk, but they felt cold and uncomfortable, like chains keeping you there. Your first night in the dormitory was terrifying. You could hear the soft sobbing of other boys crying for their families, trying to keep their tears quiet. The sound of footsteps echoed down the halls as older boys and guards patrolled the building. There was no privacy. You felt trapped. You still held the small wooden cross your mother had given you when they took you away. But by morning, that too was taken. You were given a new name, Mehmet, and told to forget your Christian roots. Conversion to the Empire's religion was not a choice. It was part of becoming an Ottoman servant. The ceremony was done with a lot of show, as if you had willingly chosen this path, but you knew the truth. You had no choice. You repeated the words they told you to say, but inside you still held on to the memories of your mother's lullabies and your father's stories. They couldn't take that from you, at least not yet. The worst part of your new life came when you learned the real meaning of obedience. The system was built on more than just learning. The palace's leaders wanted to break your spirit and remake you into something they could control, something that served them without question. This was the system you are now a part of. As time went on, you learned the unspoken rules. To survive, you had to do more than just follow orders. You had to find a way to please those above you, whether it was through your obedience or sometimes something worse. Some boys figured this out quickly, trading favors for protection, but that came at the cost of their innocence. Others refused to comply and were beaten, forgotten. It was a cruel system, one that only made you feel more alone and helpless. By the time you realized what had happened, you had already changed. You were no longer the boy from the village. You were something else, shaped by the Empire, just like the others. But inside you still held on to the memory of your mother's lullabies and your father's stories. However, the worst part of your time at the palace was how they started to break you down, little by little. They didn't just teach you things, they changed you. The palace had a strict system where getting ahead wasn't just about learning, it was about pleasing those in charge, and pleasing them wasn't always innocent or kind. Your first lesson came from Ahmet, an older boy who'd been in the palace system for 3 years. He found you one evening in the dormitory, his voice soft but full of both a warning and a promise. "You're new," he said, sitting next to you on your bed, uninvited. "You don't understand how things work here yet, but I can help you. I can protect you and teach you the ropes. The teachers like me, and they listen when I tell them about the younger boys." He put his hand on your shoulder, and you felt yourself freeze. You were only 12, and no one had ever touched you like this before, but something about his touch made you uncomfortable. He kept talking, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You'll need to show your gratitude. There are ways boys like you can thank older students for their protection, special ways that stay between us." It was a choice you didn't want to face, but you had to. If you said no, you risked punishment, even worse, social isolation and the end of any chance at survival in the palace. If you said yes, you would give up the last pieces of your childhood innocence. You would become part of a system that saw your body as something to be used, traded for protection and favour. There was no right choice, only a choice to survive. The palace was a dangerous place. The older boys, who had been there longer, knew how the system worked. Many of them had been castrated when they were younger, and they used the power they gained from the system to take advantage of the new boys who arrived. Some of them had been victims too, but now they were the ones in control. They didn't help the younger boys. Instead, they hurt them. The older boys would target the newcomers, using them to get ahead and to stay safe within the system. Some of the palace officials were no better. They took advantage of their power, using their position to get close to the most beautiful boys, knowing that the boys had no one to turn to for help. No one would protect you. The system was so twisted that sexual relationships weren't kept secret. They were seen as part of the palace's social order, woven into the way everything worked. It seemed so normal, so accepted, that no one questioned it. If you caught the eye of someone powerful, your life in the palace could get a little easier. You might get better food, nicer clothes, and a more comfortable bed. But if you didn't please the right people, you would be sent to do the worst jobs, treated badly, or worse, disappear without anyone saying a word. The emotional toll of all this was devastating. You were cut off from your family, your old life, and your identity. They told you to forget who you were, and your body became something for others to use. Over time, you began to change, though not in a good way. You learned to manipulate people, using your body or your smarts to get ahead, just like the older boys did. But not everyone could do that. Some boys just couldn't handle the pressure and withdrew. They became hollow inside, going through the motions of palace life, but their spirits slowly died. You watched it happen to others, and it made you realize just how hard this life would be. You either adapted and became part of the system, or you slowly lost yourself. It was a harsh world, one that forced you to change in ways that no child should ever have to. You watched the changes happen to the boys around you. Dmitri, who had been taken from the same place as you, learned to smile and flirt with the older students and teachers. In just 6 months, he had new clothes, better food, and a private tutor to help him with his studies. But something in his eyes had changed. He was no longer the boy he once was. He no longer talked about home or family, and when new boys arrived, he looked at them with the same cold, calculating gaze the officials had once given him. Then there was Stephanos, a Greek boy who had come from a fisherman's family. He chose a different path. He refused the advances of the older boys, endured beatings, and tried his best to stay strong. But it didn't last long. Over time, he faded into the background, going through the motions of palace life without any energy or enthusiasm. One day, his bed was empty, and no one mentioned his name again. It was as if he had never been there. You tried to find a middle ground, accepting some advances to survive, but holding on to a part of yourself that stayed untouched. But the palace was designed to break you down. Every day brought new choices, decisions that forced you to either give in to the system or risk destruction. You had to choose between survival and losing yourself. Sometimes travellers from Europe came to the Ottoman court and caught glimpses of what was happening inside. But their descriptions were always filtered through their own biases, so they didn't really understand. A Venetian ambassador in the 16th century once wrote about how the palace officials were overly fond of their young male servants, describing scenes that made him uncomfortable. He wrote about seeing boys as young as 10 or 11 dressed in silk and jewels, attending to older men in a way that felt far beyond just a master-servant relationship. A French diplomat wrote more openly about what he saw at a palace event. He talked about how the young boys would move through the halls, like beautiful birds trapped in cages. Their eyes were downcast, but their bodies were dressed to be shown off. You couldn't help but notice how some of the officials looked at them, their eyes full of possession, and you could see the fear in the boys' eyes as their masters approached. Life in the palace wasn't just hard physically, it wore you down mentally too. You lived in small rooms with little privacy, where every moment of your life was watched. You were woken up before dawn for prayers, forced to learn things, and fed just enough to survive, nothing extra. The palace had a strict schedule, with no time for anything but following orders. Punishments were common, and they were meant to hurt your spirit. Boys who didn't follow the rules, whether it was speaking their native languages, keeping old traditions, or not showing enough enthusiasm for their new life, would be punished. Sometimes they would be beaten or humiliated in front of everyone. Some boys would even be locked up in tiny rooms, barely big enough for them to lie down in. One time you saw a boy named Milos. He had been caught praying the way he used to back home. As punishment, they made him stand in the courtyard all day, completely naked, while the other boys were encouraged to laugh at him. It was a lesson for everyone. Forget your past life. Your old beliefs and who you were before didn't matter anymore. They were just shameful. The palace's rules were a strange system where power was traded for rewards. If you behaved well, did well in your studies, or pleased the right people, you could earn small privileges. Maybe you'd get better food or nicer clothes. Maybe you'd have a more comfortable bed or even access to books and musical instruments. These small things meant a lot in the palace, but they came at a cost. The palace system created a complicated web of loyalties and dependencies, making it hard to resist. You had to play the game to survive, but doing so meant you were caught in a cycle that was hard to break. There was no real escape. To survive, you realized that you had to play the system. You learned how to get by using your head and acting much older than you were. You figured out that if you helped the older students with their studies, they would protect you from their advances. You also found out that if you showed you were good at certain subjects, the teachers would notice you and possibly protect you from the worst of the abuse. You learned that obedience was key. If you followed the rules and seemed excited about your new life, you could earn small freedoms. Things like better food, nicer clothes, and a bed that didn't feel like it was made of stone became the most important things in the world. Some boys tried to escape, but the palace was on a peninsula, surrounded by water, which made it nearly impossible to get away. If they were caught, the punishment was always severe. Everyone saw it. You witnessed one boy who tried to escape by swimming across the Golden Horn. When they caught him, he was barely alive. They dragged him back and beat him in front of all the other boys. It left him badly injured. He became a living warning of what happens to those who try to run away. The few boys who did manage to escape faced an even worse challenge. They had been in the palace for so long, their old lives had been erased. Their families might not even recognize them anymore. Their communities might reject them as traitors or converts. They didn't have the skills to survive outside the palace. Most of the boys who escaped were caught again within days. Even those who stayed free found themselves lost, wandering in a world that didn't have a place for them anymore. As you grew older, you survived by adapting and doing whatever it took to stay alive. The lessons you learned in the palace were harsh. You learned to keep your head down and do what was asked of you. The most successful students eventually moved up to higher positions in the empire, but this success came at a cost. You realized with horror that your teachers and supervisors, the ones who had shaped you into who you were, had once been boys like you. They had been taken from their families and changed into tools for the empire's power. This truth made you face a terrible choice. You could either resist the system and risk being destroyed by it, or you could join it, becoming part of the machine. Many boys chose the second option. It was easier to become a predator than to remain prey forever. The graduation ceremony, called Chikma, marked the end of your time at the palace school and your entry into the imperial service. After years of what seemed like education, but was really just a form of abuse, you emerged as a young man. You could speak several languages, you were trained in administration, diplomacy, and other subjects, and you had learned the arts and sciences, but you had also changed in a way that would stay with you forever. Your soul had been corrupted. Your understanding of power was now forever tied to exploitation, and your ability to form real human connections had been damaged in ways that might never heal. For many of the boys who graduated, their new roles in the empire were just another form of exploitation. Some were given positions in the government, where political power and sexual favours were tied together. Others joined the military, where they carried the scars of their palace years, becoming either brutal enforcers of the empire or broken men who struggled to find meaning in their lives. The Ottoman system was built on abuse. The people at the top knew about the cruelty, but they didn't care as long as it kept their power strong. They justified the system by saying that the boys were getting a special education, but in truth the human cost was ignored. Any complaints were brushed off, seen as ignorance of the empire's way of doing things. A historian from the 16th century wrote, "The palace school asks for great sacrifices from its students, and not all of them leave unchanged. But those who make it through become the most loyal and skilled servants of the empire." This might sound like it was for the best, but it hid the dark truth of what the boys actually went through. They weren't just tested with lessons, they faced systematic sexual abuse. Their discipline wasn't just about learning, it was about destroying their original identity and forcing them to become something they weren't. What they learned came at the cost of their innocence and their ability to have normal human relationships. What made the Ottoman palace system so disturbing was how it mixed real education with cruelty. The boys did learn things that for their time were advanced. They were taught to read and write in multiple languages, which opened doors to the world. They studied science, math, and law, and they were trained in diplomacy, administration, and military strategy. These were skills that would serve them for the rest of their lives. But the catch was that this education was inseparable from their exploitation. The same teachers who helped them expand their minds were also the ones who violated their bodies. The system that promised success and advancement also made sure those achievements would always be tainted by the methods used to get there. The Ottoman system wasn't unique in exploiting young people. Similar practices existed in many other parts of the world at the time. But what made the Ottoman system so different was how organized it was. The abuse wasn't hidden, it was part of the system, and it was even celebrated as being effective. By the 17th and 18th centuries, things began to change. New military technologies reduced the importance of the Janissary Corps, and the need for boys from the palace was lessened. Changes in the government also meant fewer people needed palace-trained officials. New ideas from Europe also played a role in transforming the system. But for the thousands of boys who went through the palace during its peak, these changes came too late. Their stories represent one of the most shocking examples of child abuse in history. These boys lost their childhood innocence, and many of them had their spirits broken, all in service to the empire's power. Some of the boys who survived rose to high positions, becoming viziers, generals, or governors who helped shape the empire's future. But even when they had power, they carried the scars of their time in the palace. Many of them repeated the cycles of abuse they had lived through. Others disappeared, forgotten by history, their suffering never acknowledged. The names and stories of these boys have been lost to history. Their lives are remembered only as simple notes in old records that mark their arrival at the palace, their training, and their eventual roles in serving the Sultan. Today the palace walls still stand, but they've been turned into a museum. Tourists visit, admiring the stunning architecture and the beautiful treasures of the Ottoman court. They marvel at the grand chambers where the empire's elite were educated, but they see only the physical beauty of the palace. The dark secrets that these walls hold are hidden from view. The rooms where education and exploitation mix together remain silent about the real cost, the suffering of thousands of boys who gave everything for the empire's glory. The guided tours talk about how the palace school was an important place for training leaders and administrators who helped the empire thrive. What they don't talk about is the abuse that was at the heart of how the system worked. They don't mention the boys who died rather than give in to the palace's demands, or the men who came out of those halls forever changed by what they had experienced. As I tell you this story, I remember that these experiences are not just historical curiosities. They are the stories of real children, taken from their families, stripped of their identities, and forced to live in a world that cared more about what their bodies and minds could offer than who they were as people. These boys, like you, are the ones I imagine walking through those marble halls, afraid and silent, their stories never recorded or remembered. Their suffering was ignored by the system that created and kept it alive. Your ghost, and the ghosts of all the boys who lived through this, still haunt those palace halls. They remind us that behind the beauty of any empire, there is often a hidden foundation built on human suffering. The price of power is too often paid by those who had no choice in the matter. It's not just the violence that is horrifying, but how it was done systematically, how it was accepted as normal, and how it was completely forgotten by history. Boys like you lived and died in a system that treated you like beautiful objects, things to be moulded and used. Your stories shouldn't be forgotten or seen as just part of a distant past. They should be remembered as examples of human resilience in the face of a system designed to break you down. The sound of your footsteps in the palace may have faded, but your story is still out there. It still echoes through time, demanding that we recognize your suffering. By remembering your story, we don't just honor your pain, but the suffering of all children who have been used and discarded by powerful systems throughout history, systems that value conquest over compassion, empire over innocence.